author, columnist, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com, talk show host, and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's edition, we are talking election fallout, the aftermath, what comes next for the Republicans in the wake of the Democrat landslide this last week. And you're here on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, as always, Mark Angelides. And we're joined by Liberty Nation's senior political analyst and longtime host of this here radio show, Mr. Tim Donner. Welcome back, Tim.
Hello, Mark. Good to be here.
So we're recording in the wake of, what's the opposite of a Super Tuesday? A mini Tuesday, a mini March Tuesday.
Is he a gas leak Tuesday for Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the
terrible Tuesday. Terrible Tuesday for Republicans, Super Tuesday for Democrats.
Very much so.
But there's a question of just how significant it all is. So
that is what we're going
fire away.
Yeah, so we had the big races. We had the gubernatorials in Virginia and New Jersey, also in Virginia. We had the attorney general's race, which, I don't know, has some head spinning, I guess. And of course, there's the New York City mayoral race, among some others as well, of course. There were some Pennsylvania Supreme Court ones. And others, but those were the big races, and they all went. All the significant races went the way of Democrats. Now, just as a general overview, Tim, this is I don't know. This is a bad week for Donald Trump and the Republicans? Is it a worse week for one or the other?
Well, it's not a good week for Donald Trump. There's no way you could spin it any other way. But it was kind of a perfect storm with the government shutdown and the cutting of the size of the federal government, including, slicing off thousands of federal employees, made for a very predictable result in Virginia. I think all of us were surprised at New Jersey, because Chitterelli looked like he had been closing in and he ran a very good campaign. But it shows you something that we've discussed before, Mark, which is that angry people vote. Motivated voters are those who are angry about the current state of play. So Democrats showed up in massive numbers in Virginia, in New Jersey, and of course in New York City, which was, in a way, the most stunning result of all, although it was unexpected. Although it was expected, I should say. Mamdani's margin was slightly smaller than we might have expected, but he won a majority of the vote.
Yes. Over 50%.
The two races that are hard to comprehend are the New Jersey governor's race, because of the fact that Chitterelli ran such a good race, and it didn't appear that Mikey Sherrill had run a particularly good race. He had been closing in, and to lose by 15 points is a shocker. The other shocker, and I have to get personal here for a moment, because as a Virginia resident for 30 years, I have to say this is the first time I've been ashamed to be a Virginian, because the people of this state voted by a 7-point margin to elect Jay Jones as the Attorney General, despite the fact that he had openly, on a text message, called for the murder of a political opponent and his kids. I mean, I really thought that there were some things that were too far over the line, but for Virginians, apparently not. And so now we have a man who's threatened to murder a political enemy as the chief law enforcement officer of the Old Dominion. That is discouraging. And really, I have to say it, I mean, it's shameful for Virginia. It wouldn't matter whether it was the Republican or the Democrat that sent out those vile messages. whoever did it should have lost and didn't. But it shows you again, straight ticket voting. Jones won by far less than Abigail Spanberger, the winning gubernatorial nominee. But nevertheless, it's a dark day for Republicans, conservatives, and I would argue ordinary people in Virginia. I don't know if I can get partisan because I'm a senior political analyst. I'm not a partisan, but this one is hard to swallow for so many people across the Commonwealth.
Yeah, what really struck me with that race in particular was as soon as those text messages sort of gained traction in the wider media, although obviously not in every media source, of course, you still had people like Senator Tim Kaine still backing Jay Jones, and it was almost like that there's no principle that that certain people will not bend if it benefits them tribally and politically. And I think there was also something to the polling there as well, Tim, because what you saw was after these text messages came out, he didn't threaten to kill. He just said that he should be killed along with his infant children.
Well, you could call it, the best way to describe it would be a death wish.
Yes, that's a more accurate set. But so what we saw after those came out was we saw a tightening of the polls, and in fact, a large chunk of polling flipped to the incumbent Republican AG, Jason Miyares. And so what was happening was the day before the election, I think it was a 0.3% advantage for Jay Jones, 0.3%, which is well within any margin of error. And it looked like an incredibly close race. And then it comes out 53 to 46, 7 points. Something tells me that people who are responding to polls, and I don't blame the pollsters on this, because this is if you go and check out Liberty Nation's Public Square polling, we've got a list of all the polls that were done for this. It was consistent across the board. And so what I think happened was people were ashamed to tell a pollster that they were willing to vote for Jay Jones because of what Jay Jones did. And yet when they get in the privacy of the ballot box, it's all tribal. What do you make?
It is. I mean, it politics trumps everything. And pun intended there with the Trumps. But you take a look, for example, at that. Let's just use an example, the National Organization for Women. Okay, that is an organization designed to advance women, right?
Yeah.
However, when a Republican woman or a conservative woman comes along, they do not support the woman.
Sure.
So it really is the National Organization of Liberal Women under the sort of false banner of National Organization for Women.
Well, but
it's the same thing. It's the same thing when it comes to political races. That when it comes down to it, enough Democrats felt that voting against Jay Jones was voting for the party of Donald Trump. And, in the end, most people will vote straight ticket, Democrat or Republican. That didn't happen here. But because Spanberger ran up such a huge margin over Winsome Earl Sears, it gave some latitude to Jones to get less votes than Spanberger, but still win. And Winsome Sears was a goner from the beginning.
Well, we're going to talk about that particular race after this short break. If you want to hear it, don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Andrew back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain Mark Angelides, and Tim Donner, senior political analyst over at libertynation.com, remains Tim Donner. Thanks for sticking around, Tim. We just got into talking about the gubernatorial contests, and specifically, I want this last weekend. Specifically, I want to talk about the Virginia one between Abigail Spanberger and Winsome Earl Sears. For now, the Republican lieutenant governor, but not for much longer. And you were just mentioning before we went to break about how Jay Jones, the attorney general, kind of got some cover by being down ballot from Abigail Spanberger. But Abigail Spanberger, I think it seems to me, Tim, and you're the top political analyst on the show here. It seems to me that this was more a case of Winsome Earl Sears' loss than it was Abigail Spanberger's win. Now, granted, Virginia's, it's DC adjacent, so it's got a lot of people who are reliant upon DC and the federal government for their work. And these guys, they've either been fired during the first 9 months of the year, or this last month they're furloughed. And so there's some built-in things here. But I think it would have been a lot more competitive if Winsome Earl Sears hadn't really she kind of backed away from the MAGA base, and which isn't huge in Virginia. I mean, it exists, no doubt about it. It exists, but I think that. Do you remember 2022, when I think it was Glenn Youngkin's mantra, wasn't it? It was hold the House, flip the Senate, something like that, and failed to do either. And as Lieutenant Governor, Earl Sears came out and blamed Donald Trump for this, and that relationship's never really recovered.
No, first of all, let's say that if Glenn Youngkin was running for re-election, with a popularity of approval of 58%, I think that Youngkin probably would have been reelected because he really has been effective. He's an excellent retail politician. But Sears made the mistake of separating herself from Trump and doing a back and forth with him, as you say, in 2022. And at that moment, Trump just completely wrote off Sears, who was not a good candidate to begin with. She just never got traction, and was probably going to lose anyway. But when the shrinking of the federal government and the firing of all those federal employees that live in Northern Virginia took place, and she was dead woman walking for weeks, if not months. So it shows you it's very hard to be a Republican these days if you're not completely on the MAGA train, because Donald Trump is the dominant force, the preeminent force in the Republican Party, and there is nobody else to attach yourself to. And so Trump did not endorse Sears. She wouldn't have won anyway. But the fact he didn't endorse her says a lot about her lack of political skill.
Again, I want to come back to this polling, because polls aren't predictions; they're indicators. But you had an average polling aggregate of 8.4% advantage for Spanberger over Earl Sears. And it's Virginia. You kind of go, oh, okay, she's not the most exciting candidate. She doesn't have Donald Trump in her corner on the campaign trail. 8.4, you can kind of see it. But in the end, it wasn't an 8.4% loss. It was a 15% loss. That's just devastating. That's the entire Virginia GOP apparatus back to the drawing board to figure out how do we rebuild, or how do they rebuild? I mean,
the thing is, Donald Trump has never been popular in Virginia.
Sure.
Writ large. I mean, he is in the southern part of the state, the more rural areas, like in most states. But he's never gone over in Virginia. It's the only southern state that he's lost 3 times.
Yeah.
Most of the others he lost maybe once in Georgia, and that was about it. But Virginia, he lost 3 times. So it's really, in the end, though the result was far more overwhelming than we expected, a 15-point victory. I don't think it would make a whole lot of difference if it was 5 points, 2 points, or 10 points. The fact is, Virginia has now become a certified blue state. It's really not purple anymore. People thought that maybe it was because Glenn Youngkin was elected 4 years ago in an upset over the Democrat operative Terry McAuliffe. But that was just, that was an aberration. And blue states do occasionally, as in New Jersey, elect Republican governors to sort of, as I like to say, the Democrats in these states love to vote for big, broad, big government policies and lots of spending. And then they elect Republican governors to make sure they don't have to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the entire Northeast United States, isn't it?
More or less.
More or less. So let's continue that talk specifically about New Jersey here. And Jack Ciattarelli, he did really well in 2021, coming within, I think it was like just over three points of taking the crown from Phil Murphy. And against Mikey Sherrill, the Democrat candidate this time around. For me, this was the only one that I really thought had a chance of, if not turning to the Republican, at least being something we'll be watching down to the wire in the early hours of the morning.
It's hard to believe because Ciattarelli, by most accounts, ran an excellent campaign.
Yeah,
he's an excellent retail politician.
Yeah.
But the failure of the polls in this one was just enormous. I mean, I think even most Democrats thought that Sherrill might win by 3 or 4 points. I don't think anybody predicted double digits, least of all me. I thought Ciattarelli had a really decent shot of actually winning that race. But, even though energy costs have skyrocketed under the Democratic Governor Phil Murphy and the cost of living has gone further and further up, those were the factors that, myself and others thought might weigh heavily in Ciattarelli's favor. In the end, it seems more a referendum on Donald Trump than anything else. Trump had lost New Jersey by only 6 points in 2024, down from 15 points that he lost by in 2020. But, these year after presidential off-year elections are, generally served broadly as a referendum on the first year of the president. And of course, what Trump is doing is so controversial to so many people that, and Republican voters, and this is a huge factor. They've shown consistently they don't turn out when Donald Trump is not on the ballot. And this is the same phenomenon as Barack Obama, who is another historic figure just like Trump. Obama was able to be elected and reelected easily, but his party crumbled. Meanwhile, Trump has been elected twice, some say 3 times, and yet the Republican Party has not been nearly as effective in the midterms and off-year election with Trump as president.
Right, we're going to be continuing this conversation after the short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain Mark Angelides, and we're continuing our long conversation with Tim Donner, Liberty Nation senior political analyst and longtime host of this here show. And we've been discussing the elections that took place last week in Virginia, New Jersey, and we're just about to start talking about New York City, Tim, which you outed yourself earlier as being a long-term Virginia resident, but you are, by birth and spirit, some believe,
yes,
an actual New Yorker.
Yes.
So what do you make of Mamdani's, well, let's call it, it's an historic win, no doubt about it.
Well, both my parents died in the last couple of years, Mark. And if they hadn't, I think they probably would upon the election of a socialist as mayor of New York. I think the surprising thing about it, beyond the fact that Mamdani was able to come out of nowhere as an obscure figure and use his charisma and the right issues to win the race. I think it's significant, Mark, that Mamdani won a majority of the vote. That matters. And what surprised me, though, was that once he was victorious at his victory speech, he doubled down and basically challenged anybody to have an issue with the fact that A, he was a democratic socialist, B, he was a Muslim, and he said, and I'm not going to apologize for either one of them, to the cheers of the crowd. So in other words, what he's doing is he's laying down a gauntlet when you might have thought that he would try to reach out and say things like, I'll be a mayor for everybody. There's no reason for anybody to be concerned because, you know, I'm going to be a mayor for all the people and that kind of rhetoric. That's not what we heard.
No.
What we heard is I'm a proud democratic socialist and a Muslim, and I intend to, I guess, for lack of a better word, behave as such. And so I think, let's put it this way, I think the exodus out of New York is beginning immediately, right now, because businesses and people of means are not going to wait around to see how much more money he's going to confiscate, how he's going to affect public safety, how he's going to run up even larger deficits than the city already has. It has the potential to be a true nightmare for New Yorkers. But at the same time, I think Republicans, and I think it's a cynical view, but there are many Republicans who said, I hope he does win, because then he'll ruin the city and people will see that the Democratic Party has gone off the deep end and they'll get routed in the midterms. I mean, I don't know about that. Mamdani was an excellent campaigner. Here's what he did, Mark. He identified the real issues facing New York, which was the cost of living, affordability, the cost of food, the cost of housing. He identified the problems much better than any Democrat had in quite some time. Of course, the solutions are toxic. They're the worst possible solutions, which are socialism, raising taxes, basically seizing the means of production.
Sir, sir, we have a fire over here. Can you help us put it out? Sure, here's some gasoline.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. And so, you know, Mamdani, he campaigned extremely well, but there's no indication that he knows how to govern. And the early indication from his victory speech is that he's not going to moderate one bit.
So you're absolutely right. The things that stood out to me was the mention of Eugene Debs, which was the socialist candidate, 5-time socialist candidate for president, who notably campaigned from a prison cell. And so this is the person who's pointing to as in his victory speech, Eugene Debs, a socialist. So when we pass words democratic socialist, it kind of gives you an idea of which side of that he comes down on.
Well, I think too that it has to be true that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and other Democratic leaders were cringing when he said that, because, you know, none of the national Democratic leaders endorsed him because they feel that, and rightfully so, that socialism is a death knell for the Democratic Party. What they want, writ large, is the type of candidates that Abigail Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill, the new governors of Virginia and New Jersey, respectively, are perceived to be moderate. But the Republicans, as somebody said, I'm not sure who, every Republican running next year will insert the middle name of Mamdani to every Democratic opponent and call them socialists too, and tell them to go ahead and announce your support for Mamdani. And if not, announce your opposition. So for the Democrats, it's, I think, largely a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody's going to be remembering these few off-term races, off-year elections come the midterms next year.
Yeah. What was most notable for me about Mamdani's win was, as you say, firstly, he got a majority, not just a plurality. But the amount of votes cast was quite shocking. I mean, it was over 2 million votes in the end, and that might not sound like a lot for New York City, but it was
the highest turnout
since
1969.
Yeah, John Lindsay. Yeah,
and that was a year that they elected a Republican who you could make a case was the worst mayor in the history of New York. Although you had David Dinkins and you had Bill de Blasio, but John Lindsay was someone who completely turned the city in the wrong direction, and it never fully recovered from it.
Sure.
So here we are, decades later, and the highest turnout since that election is for a Democratic Socialist. Now, I think I want to make one more point about the New York race, which is it was very clever politics by Mamdani to appeal to the day-to-day kitchen table needs of young New Yorkers.
Yeah.
And he was able to do it by promising socialistic solutions. And he knew, and he knows, that those young people never lived through the Soviet Union, Cuba, the tyranny, and the millions of people killed under socialism and communism. They don't have any recollection of that. They weren't alive when it happened. They have no resistance to that because they don't know anything about it. And so the smooth-talking Mamdani was able to convince them that he will solve all of their problems, and they don't have the experience or knowledge to know better.
It's funny you put it in that particular way because the exit polling, the data behind who voted in which way kind of thing. It's you had Mamdani was favored by the college educated, and Cuomo was favored by the actual working classes. I think that's one interesting data point because you've got these because they've got student debt, they think that makes them working class, and it's a funny way to look at it back, especially considering Mamdani, and this is one of the criticisms that I think really should have landed a lot harder during the debates, is that he's never actually had a proper job. I mean, he's worked for his mother, and then he got on the government teat, as it were. And, he still lives in a rent-controlled apartment, there's been some scandals about whether he's entitled to it or not. But this is somebody who's never built anything other than a campaign and perhaps a movement. We'll find that out in the future. He's never worked at anything except
that's why he aimed his campaign at gullible young people who will fall for anything because they don't stand for anything really other than trying to make a living, and that's understandable, but they don't have the depth to understand what they've just done. And it's the goose that laid the golden egg has now been killed. And I think we're going to see, I use the word exodus, and I think that's the appropriate word for what's going to happen in New York, an exodus out of there to, to the south, to Florida, to Texas, to Arizona, to other places. You can already see how many seats the Democrats are going to lose come 2030 because people are abandoning the North in favor of the South. And there's going to be probably a good 12 new Republican congressional seats come 2030. on top of any that may occur with this midterm gerrymandering that's going on, which was approved.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, by a landslide, right? It's over 60% on that.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to talk about what the future holds for both political parties in the wake of this week's elections after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back for our final segment on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I'm Mark Angelides. We're continuing our conversation with Tim Donner. So, Tim, we've covered the Virginia Attorney General's race, the Virginia Gubernatorial, the New Jersey Gubernatorial, and the New York City mayoral election. So let's talk. Let's try and wrap this up in a neat little bow. This was an off-year election where the party who's just won the election, it's the first opportunity for voters to say, I wasn't happy with that election result. Do you think that the narrative here will be long-lasting enough to have any impact on next year's politics, specifically the midterms?
I don't think the results here in 2025 are going to be any kind of factor, because there's way too much that's going to happen between now and November of 2026. I think it's going to rest on the economy, because, between the tariffs and the trillions in new investment that Trump has attracted to the country, and his real push for economic growth, if that succeeds, I'd say the Republicans have a chance to stave off defeat in the House in midterms, because going into it, clearly the Democrats will be favored, as the out party almost always is in the midterms of a new president. So for the Democrats, it's a matter of defining their brand.
Yeah.
Because every Democrat will be accused of being another Mamdani, and how they respond to that will determine whether the party's going to move even further left. Because we also have, it looks like, a new mayor of Minneapolis out in Minnesota, who's a socialist as well. Socialists are on the ascent, and moderates, so-called moderates in the Democratic Party, are teetering. And we don't know where the party's going to be, but the image of the party, the branding of the party between now and next November will be critical. Will they be seen as more Mamdani, or they will be seen as more a John Fetterman party? I think that's the big question.
I would change I know it's your analogy and you're welcome to it, but I would change that a little bit. Is it the party of Mamdani? And you chose John Fetterman there, who is such an outlier in terms of his points of view, in terms of his even his voting record, and how he speaks about his own party. But I wonder if it's more a case of Mamdani or Chuck Schumer. Now,
Yes.
I think that's close. But also, is Chuck Schumer, your opinion on this, Tim, is he going to face a big threat from AOC?
Almost certainly.
I think,
and I would say that AOC, stands more than a puncher's chance of knocking him off. Now, that race, Mark, I'm glad you brought it up, because that will define.
Yeah.
That really will define the Democrats' attempt to establish their identity. But the biggest advantage that they'll have going into next November is the same that they had in November here in 2025, which is that Donald Trump will not be on the ballot. And considering that there's a lot of people that voted for Trump who don't even like the Republican Party, they like Trump, but they don't necessarily like the Republican establishment. I wouldn't put any money on the Republicans being able to hold the House, although they have more leeway in the Senate, where they can afford to lose 3 seats and still hold control of the Senate.
Yeah, I think that the Senate, Doing the electoral math, the Senate looks a lot safer. Even though the things have actually kind of flipped, haven't they, since the last election cycle, 2024, where it was Democrats largely defending seats. This cycle, it's largely Republicans defending seats. But there's a lot more safe seats there. And I just wonder how much damage will be done to the party if there are some really vicious primaries from the Democrats, because I don't see how AOC can challenge Chuck Schumer in the primary and not create some wounds that will continue to bleed across the country. Because
I think you're absolutely right, but I think it also means it's going to encourage, animate other left-wing Democrats, progressives, to challenge more traditional liberal members of the Democratic Party. I think you get a number of primaries within the Democratic Party from the socialists who were on the ascent. But, socialism has never gone over in this country.
Yeah.
And, in 2020, they ran every candidate out of the race, including Bernie Sanders, the presidential race, because they knew he couldn't win because he's a socialist. So they basically cleared the field for Joe Biden because he was perceived to be a moderate. Of course, he governed then as a progressive, but he did not campaign that way. So there's a reckoning coming in the Democratic Party. And I think the AOC Schumer contest is what's going to frame it.
There's something coming back to the New York City mayoral race. It was notable to me. We did discuss this earlier in the show that it was over 2 million votes were cast, which was the highest since 1969. But Andrew Cuomo, former Democrat governor of New York State, he got over 850,000 votes, and that would have won him any mayoral election in the last 32 years. Right, the only person who got higher in recent history was Rudy Giuliani in 1993, and so that kind of tells me that even though Mamdani had a huge victory here, the pushback was equally seismic in many ways.
If you told me that Curtis Lewa, the Republican, was only going to get 7 or 8% of the vote, I would have said, well, Cuomo might really have a chance. Evidently, a lot of Lewa voters pivoted over to Cuomo. But also, Mark, how about the Republican Party of New York City? Could they not come up with someone better than the eccentric guardian angel Curtis Lewa? He's always been a fringe candidate. And Republicans have won before with the likes of Giuliani and Michael Bloomberg, but they had no one serious to put up this time.
I hear Tim Donna's calendar is free for 2029. Thanks for being here, Tim. Much appreciated.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guest today, Mr. Tim Donna, Liberty Nation's senior political analyst and longtime host of this here radio show. And of course, thank you, the listeners, for taking the time each week to tune in and join us on the show. You are appreciated. Please remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation. This presentation is no endorsement.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.